Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin. Aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus. Aye. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Lautenberg. Aye. Mr. Ensign. Mr. Ensign. Aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Aye. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune. Aye. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt. Aye. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski. Aye. Mr. Begich. Mr. Begich. Aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein. Aye.
Are there any members wishing to vote or to change his or her vote? If not, we have 96 ayes. We have 1 nay. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
The leader.
Could we have order, please?
Yes. The chamber will be in order, please. The chamber will be in order. The leader.
Yes, he's right here. Mr. President, could we have order?
Yes, please. Order, please. Thank you.
Mr. President, we've made good progress on this bill. We're working through the amendments. The staff's been doing a lot of yeoman's work. Finance Committee is going to meet on Tuesday to report out funding for this bill. They have a path forward to do that. We need to keep the amendments relative to the Federal Aviation Administration, and that's been good. We have made, as I've indicated, had some substantive amendments that we've worked on. We're voting on a couple here this evening, and staff has worked on a number that they can resolve. We are going to make more progress next week. We hope to complete the action early in the week of the 14th. As indicated, it's been scheduled for a long period of time. Democratic senators have a retreat next week. We are going to have votes Monday night and Tuesday morning. Everyone can count on that. But we felt, looking at the schedule tomorrow, we can accomplish just as much with having the Senate in session tomorrow. The majority will be here taking amendments or doing whatever is necessary on this bill. And if somebody wants to give a speech on whatever their heart desires, they'll be able to do that tomorrow also. So this next vote will be the last vote of the week.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
Let me just say briefly.
And
Order.
please order the Republican leader.
We're making good progress on this bill. This bill is being handled like we've been accustomed in the old days to handling the Senate. I want to commend the Majority Leader for that. We're going to be able to work our way through it with amendments related to the subject from here on in and wrap it up, as he suggests, the week of the 14th.
That is great. The question is on the motion to table the amendment from the senator from Kentucky. The yeas and nays have been ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. No. Mr. Barrasso. No. Mr. Baucus, Mr. Beckidge, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown in Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Rubio. Who? Mr. Carton. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Ensign. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein.
We're obsessed with Western medicine credentials. So we're not, they need to know we're just not.
Mr. Franken.
You know, our favorite
Mrs. Gillibrand.
research.
Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch.
The other names,
Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Noe. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Carey. Mr. Kirk.
the field of education and introducing this country.
Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin.
How we sequence of the things. Thank you.
Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson, Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Akaka, Bekich, Bennett, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Boxer, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Conrad, Coons, Durbin, Feinstein, Franken, Gillibrand, Hagan, Harkin, Inouye, Johans, Johnson of South Dakota, Kerry, Kirk, Klobuchar, Cole, Landrieu, Lautenberg, Leahy, Levin, Lieberman, McCaskill, Menendez, Merkley, Mikulski, Murkowski, Murray, Nelson of Nebraska, Nelson of Florida, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Rockefeller, Sanders, Schumer, Shaheen, Stabenow, Tester, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Webb, Whitehouse, and Wyden. Senators voting in the negative: Alexander, Ayotte, Barrasso, Blunt, Bozeman, Brown of Massachusetts, Burr, Chambliss, Coates, Cochran, Collins, Corker, Cornyn, Crapo, Dement, Enzi, Graham, Grassley, Hoeven, Hutchison, Inhofe, Isaacson, Johnson of Wisconsin, Kyle, Lee, Lugar, McCain, McConnell, Moran, Paul, Portman, Risch, Roberts, Rubio, Sessions, Shelby, Snow, Thune, Toomey, Vitter, and Wicker. Mr. Ensign, no. Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Mr. Baucus? Aye. Mr. Brown of Ohio? Aye.
Yeah. Are there any senators in the chamber who wish to vote or to change a vote? If not, on this vote, the ayes are 55, the nays are 42, and the motion to table is agreed to.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask for the regular order. What amendment we're on right now?
Does the senator request to set aside an amendment?
Yeah. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment for the consideration of Inhofe Amendment Number 6.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, but I don't want to object. I would ask the indulgence of the senator, if he would, before he engages in a discussion of his amendment, if he would permit Senator McCain and I to send to the desk a resolution with respect to Egypt, and we would both like to speak just a very brief moment of time on it.
Yeah, Mr. President, all I want to do is get 2 amendments in the queue in 30 seconds.
Mr. President, I have no objection.
Okay. Now, Mr. President, I ask...
Without objection, so ordered.
To waive the reading of the amendment. And
Clerk will report the amendment by number.
The Senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Inhofe, proposes amendment number 6.
yes, ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Without objection.
Unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment for the consideration of Inhofe Amendment number 7.
Without objection. The clerk will report.
The Senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Inhofe, proposes amendment number 7.
Yes, ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. I yield the floor.
Without objection.
Chris.
Mr. President.
They're working on it.
Senator from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. President, I will not send this resolution to the desk. What we are doing is it is currently being hotlined in both offices, and so it may be actually dealt with in a short period of time in the Senate, in the wrap-up, or wherever we are. But Senator McCain and I both wanted to speak briefly to this resolution. This is a resolution which expresses the deep concern of the United States Senate over the events that are taking place in Egypt at this time. We acknowledge the long relationship and the importance of the relationship with Egypt, and most importantly, we call attention to the need at this moment for the government of Egypt and for all of the parties involved in this to take every step possible to avoid violence, to respect the rights of people in Egypt to assemble, to express their rights, to fight for and demonstrate for a transition in their lives and in their country. This is a now many days long demonstration, the longest in the history of Egypt, in which hundreds have been killed, many hundreds, thousands wounded. It is our hope, and we express this, that over the next days, responsible leadership will stand up on all sides and work towards a transition process that respects people's rights and that builds a future that meets the aspirations that have been expressed so passionately in the streets of cities all across Egypt. We hope that this process will respect the right of journalists to report on the events in Egypt to the people of Egypt as well as to the people of the world who are watching. And we ask the leadership there to find a path by which they can transition to some kind of interim government over these next days that will build towards the elections, that can be free and fair and set an example for how any country in this kind of crisis can deal with it and, most importantly, meet the aspirations of their people. So I'm privileged to join with Senator McCain, Senator Graham and others in an effort to try to send this message from the United States Senate about our deep concern over the violence and our hopes and prayers that in the next hours and next days, responsible leadership will step up and do what is right. Mr. President, I think Senator McCain would like to speak.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona is recognized.
Mr. President, on behalf of Senator Kerry, the distinguished chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and myself and others, we send this resolution to the desk. And I will send it after I finish my remarks. Mr. President, and we will not be seeking a vote at this time because we are hotlining the resolution. But, Mr. President, this is a seminal moment in the history of the Middle East and the world. We are seeing an uprising and a movement that spread across the entire Middle East. Egypt is the heart and soul of the Arab world. And what we have been watching unfold in the last week
has grieved all of us and concerned all of us. And there is every possibility that this crisis lurches into a genuine massacre. And we cannot afford that. And we must do everything in our power to see that it stops. Senator Kerry's and my resolution urges the Egyptian military to demonstrate maximum professionalism and restraint, and emphasizes the importance of working to peacefully restore calm and order while allowing for free and nonviolent freedom of expression. We do not want the Egyptian military to encourage thugs. We do not want the Egyptian military to be a party to increased violence. We are concerned about an interim government. That interim government must be representative of all democratic forces within Egypt. We call on, in this resolution, President Mubarak to immediately begin an orderly and peaceful transition to a democratic political system, including the transfer of power to an inclusive interim caretaker government in coordination with leaders from Egypt's opposition, civil society, and military. And again, I want to emphasize, I know my colleagues know, the Egyptian military is the most respected institution in Egypt, and they risk turning the people of Egypt against them unless they act as a genuine peacemaker in Egypt. Mr. President, I've been involved in the Middle Eastern affairs for many, many years, and I've traveled many times to the region. What is happening here is a seminal event, and how it turns out will affect the future of the 21st century. If Egypt turns to radical Islamic extremism and other countries as well, it poses not only a threat to America's national security, but to the well-being of tens or hundreds of millions of people who have the God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as we guarantee to all people. So I want to say again, thanks to Senator Kerry. We are sending a message from the United States Senate that I'm sure the overwhelming majority of my colleagues will agree with. Stop the bloodletting. Let's start a peaceful transition to a free and open society and a government that can regain and hold the trust of the people of Egypt. This, as I say, is a seminal moment and one that I think the future of peace in the world will be relied upon. So I thank my colleagues for this, and we look forward to further discussion of this, but we wanted to bring this up now. Is very important, since tomorrow could be a very, very, very critical day in the history of the Egyptian people's struggle for independence and freedom.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina is recognized.
I just want to congratulate and compliment my colleagues from Massachusetts and Arizona. This resolution represents the best of the United States Senate. You're having two people who are very well versed in the ways of the world and understand America and what we stand for, and they've crafted a document that I would like to co-sponsor. I ask unanimous consent to be a co-sponsor.
Without objection.
Tomorrow is a big day for the future of Egypt, and Senator McCain said it well to the Army. I doubt if you're watching C-SPAN, but you have a chance to bring order out of chaos and to continue to have respect throughout the world and within the borders of Egypt. Do not let this opportunity pass. An interim government should be formed quickly, as this resolution urges. And when it comes to the Egyptian people, I have faith that the young women who are risking their life and limb in the square tonight and tomorrow are not doing so to be required to wear a burqa in the future. I have faith that the young men who are risking their life and limb tonight and tomorrow would not want such a fate for their daughters and their wives. I have great respect for Islam. Radical Islam, like any other form of religion, is a threat to all we hold dear. The Egyptian people have a chance to chart a new way for the future of the Arab world and the world at large. This resolution is a statement of principle by the United States Senate that we stand with you and all those who believe in tolerance and the dignity of mankind. So this statement is bipartisan, it's well thought out, and I think it reflects where the American people want to be in relationship to Egypt. One final thought. To those in Congress who want to act quickly about defunding our relationship with Egypt, please consider the consequences of such an action. Give the Egyptian people a chance to work this out. Give the Army a chance to bring order out of chaos. It is in our national security interest that we have a stable Egypt. The Army is the most respected institution, and we should not
Gentleman,
be
yield for a quick
today.
question.
Yes.
Isn't the time now to urge democracy and freedom, not the time to threaten? There's plenty of time to threaten the Egyptian government and people with reprisal. The time now is to urge democracy and freedom.
Well said. It is now time for the United States to say what we're for and urge the Egyptian people to realize their hopes and dreams and that we want to be your partner. Now's not the time to sever the partnership. Now's the time to stand by a future partnership that would be beneficial to both countries. This resolution is a statement of principle that I hope the Egyptian people will see as an acknowledgement by the United States Senate that we are with you when it comes to your best hopes and dreams.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. President, I also ask that I be added as a co-sponsor.
Without objection.
And I wanted to also commend these two great leaders, Senator Kerry and Senator McCain, for coming together on this resolution. A lot of people try to bring us apart in this great institution, but they know what counted here today, and that was to speak with one voice. I was in Vietnam, Mr. President, with Senator McCain, and I couldn't get over all the people that came up to him and still talked about the work that he and Senator Kerry had done together with POWs and other issues, how they had gone to Vietnam together. Well, once again, they have come together at a time of great crisis to tell the people of Egypt, to have the Senate tell the people of Egypt that we are there with them and we are behind them. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Hawaii is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today to strongly oppose Senator Wicker's amendment to prevent Transportation Security Administration employees from being able to collectively bargain. There is really no need for the Senate to use valuable time considering this issue right now. Congress gave the administrator of TSA the authority to determine if and how collective bargaining should take place in the Air Transportation Security Act, which established TSA in the wake of the attacks of September 11th. Administrator Pistole, who has a strong national security background, is evaluating this issue in detail, and I feel that we should let him complete his review. Although I believe Senator Pistole should be given, Administrator Pistole should be given time to make the decision on granting collective bargaining rights to TSA employees, I want to address the argument some are making in opposing TSA workers' rights. I believe giving TSA employees a greater voice in their workplace would be good for security. TSA suffers from low morale, high attrition, and high injury rates. National security is jeopardized when agencies charged with protecting our safety continually lose trained and talented employees due to workplace injuries and a lack of employee protections. Moreover, the vast majority of federal employees have collective bargaining rights. This includes other employees of the Department of Homeland Security performing similar security functions, such as Border Patrol agents, Federal Protective Service officers, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers. In addition, there currently are some private airport screeners with full collective bargaining rights. Airport security is handled by contract screeners in a handful of airports, including some large ones. These contract employees have full collective bargaining rights. Ironically, some have recently been arguing for contracting security at more airports, saying the security is better there. To be clear, I strongly support federalized airport security, but if there are any benefits where security is contracted, perhaps it is because the screeners are unionized, not because they are privatized. Proponents of collective bargaining restrictions say they are necessary so that TSA has the flexibility to respond to emergencies. That is simply not true. Under federal law, agencies are provided the authority to take any actions they deem necessary to carry out their missions during an emergency. Granting collective bargaining rights would not in any way hinder TSA's flexibility to transfer employees in the event of a national emergency. Moreover, under civil service laws, TSA employees, like other federal employees, would be prohibited from striking if they are granted collective bargaining rights. We all remember the heroic first responders who rushed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. I vividly recall the Capitol Police officers working frantically to protect our safety when it appeared the fourth plane could strike the Capitol. These were unionized workers, like the heroes of 9/11. The brave men and women of TSA have dedicated themselves to protect our security. There is absolutely no basis for the Republicans to argue that TSA employees would invoke union contract restrictions rather than rise to the occasion in any emergency. Mr. President, I urge all senators to protect TSA employees' opportunity to have a voice in their workforce by opposing the Wicker Amendment. Mr. President, I yield back my time. Mr. President, I note an absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
espresso.
The Senate has taken its last vote for the week. The chamber today approving penalties for aiming laser pointers at airplanes. Senators also blocked a measure that would limit paying prevailing wages on public works projects. More debate on the Federal Aviation Administration bill coming up tomorrow. Majority Leader Reid says the next vote in the chamber will happen Monday night and also Tuesday morning. A Senate report on the Fort Hood shooting concluded that both the Defense Department and the FBI had sufficient information to detect that Army Major Nidal Hasan had been radicalized to extremism, but they failed to understand it and act on it. The press conference on the report will be on C-SPAN's overnight programming tonight, and right now you can see it at cspan.org. We're going to show it to you now.
Good afternoon, and thanks to everyone for coming. Today, Senator Collins and I are releasing our report on the Fort Hood terrorist attack that killed 13 people and injured 32 others on November 5th, 2009. This is a copy of the report, which I believe has been distributed to you. We're very proud of the report and grateful to our bipartisan staff that carried out the report, which we embrace today. The staff was led by the committee staff director, Mike Alexander, and his team, led by Gordon Letterman, Charlie Martel, and Seamus Hughes. The minority staff director, Brandon Milhorn, was a full partner in this endeavor and worked with others I think Senator Collins will name in her statement. The point is that they all worked very long and hard on this investigation. But the most important point is that the product of their labor, this report, presents, I believe, the most comprehensive understanding yet of the massacre at Fort Hood and enables us to make recommendations, particularly to the Department of Defense and the FBI, about how they and we can work together to better combat radicalization to violent Islamist extremism among people like Nidal Hasan, the accused killer, inside America, and to prevent anything like the murders at Fort Hood from happening again. Throughout our investigation, the victims of this attack, their families, have weighed heavily in our minds because our report's painful conclusion is that the Fort Hood massacre could have and should have been prevented. We have reached that conclusion because our investigation found that employees of the Department of Defense and the FBI had compelling evidence of Nidal Hasan's growing embrace of violent Islamist extremism in the years before the attack that should have caused them to discharge him from the U.S. military and make him the subject of an aggressive counterterrorism investigation. For instance, 2 associates at Walter Reed Army Medical Center called Hasan a, quote, ticking time bomb, and a supervisor said he was, quote, our worst. But instead of disciplining him or removing him from the military altogether. They inexplicably promoted him, and in my opinion, outrageously suggested that the evidence of his radicalization showed a knowledge of Islam that could benefit our military and our country, instead of showing that he was a clear and present danger to our military and our country. The FBI learned of Hassan's communications with a suspected terrorist who was involved in anti-American activities and was himself the subject of a major ongoing FBI terrorism investigation. The FBI has asked us not to identify this individual. The media has reached the conclusion that the individual is Anwar al-Awlaki, the American citizen, radical cleric, and terrorist who is now in Yemen. Suffice it to say that based on the evidence I've seen, this was not just one of thousands of stray pieces of evidence that comes to the FBI. It was a serious piece of evidence that required the most serious and urgent investigation. But what followed was a lackadaisical investigation of Hassan by the FBI, coupled with internal disagreements and a failure to use effective intelligence analysis that led the Bureau to end its inquiry into Hassan prematurely, thereby, I'm afraid, contributing to the government's failure to prevent the attack at Fort Hood. In other words, the FBI actually had information that a member of the United States military was in communication with a target of their own terrorist investigation and did not pursue its investigation of that lead or notify the Defense Department. In reading the report, you'll see a number of redactions. For 3 months now, we and our staff have been in difficult and often frustrating negotiations with the law enforcement and intelligence communities of our government over their proposed classifications and redactions. Although some of our objections have led to withdrawals of requests for redaction, we still believe that some of the remaining redactions are unjustified. Nevertheless, we've consented to these out of respect for the law enforcement and intelligence communities and in order to produce this report in a timely manner, confident that the remaining redactions do not diminish our findings or our recommendations. With that said, let me describe some of the evidence we found that should have flashed like red warning lights for Hassan's military colleagues and superiors and the FBI. First, let me talk about the Department of Defense. From 2003 to 2009, when Hassan was a psychiatric resident at Walter Reed and a fellow in a military post-residency graduate program, he openly suggested that revenge might be a defense for the terrorist attacks of 9/11. He openly sympathized with violent Islamist extremists and defended Osama bin Laden. He justified suicide bombers, said U.S. military operations represented a war against Islam, stated that one of the risks of having Muslims in the U.S. military was that they might commit fratricide of their fellow service members, and publicly said that he had an allegiance to his religion that was greater than his allegiance to the United States Constitution, which as a military officer he had sworn to uphold. To me, it's infuriating that a member of our armed services who expressed such radical opinions to other members of our military was not discharged. Frankly, to me, Hassan's words made him not just a ticking time bomb, but a traitor. To quote from our report, the officers who kept Hassan in the military and moved him steadily along knew full well of his problematic behavior. As the officer who assigned Hassan to Fort Hood and later decided to deploy Hassan to Afghanistan admitted to an officer at Fort Hood, "You're getting our worst," end of quote. The most astounding reason Hassan's superiors in the Army gave for not taking action against him was that Hassan could provide an understanding of violent Islamist extremism and the culture of Islam. His officer evaluation reports were thereby sanitized to turn his radicalization to violent Islamist extremism into a virtue as if he was benefiting the U.S. Army with his radical beliefs. For example, an evaluation report covering July 2007 to June 2008 said his work on the role of culture and Islamic faith in the context of terrorism, quote, has extraordinary potential to inform national policy and military strategy, end of quote. Let me now turn to the FBI's role. The FBI under Director Mueller has made substantial progress since 9/11 in transforming itself into America's lead counterterrorism organization. But in this case, unfortunately, the FBI also had the opportunity to take actions that would have prevented the Fort Hood murders and failed to do so. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force in San Diego flagged Hassan's initial communications with the Senator from West